In response to my query to fellow Portlanders about whether they felt that the Portland police promoted public safety, made them feel safer or be safer, this comment, re public safety, our police are a joke. They won't work with PSR, that's the Portland Street response. They won't do outreach, they won't focus on safety, they're nowhere to be seen most of the time. So there's near zero, quote, patrol. Yeah, I completely agree. Portlanders pretty overwhelmingly like Portland Street Response. We want it better funded. For people who don't live in Portland, Portland Street Response is a special team that responds to people in crisis. They are far better equipped to handle those situations than the police are. We have had a number of situations in Portland where folks having a mental health crisis who were struggling ended up with a very poor outcome because the police responded. The Portland Street Response is part of the public safety team. They show up to de-escalate situations and offer assistance. If somebody calls 911, there are certain situations in which the PSR is a far more appropriate group of folks to show up than the cops. I would argue many, many situations. So for right now, if somebody is having a mental health crisis, or they appear to be intoxicated or drug affected, or there's somebody who is outside and down, not checked, they're a person who's outside and yelling, they're a person who needs a referral for services but doesn't have access to a phone line, and there aren't weapons involved, the person is not obstructing traffic, that person is not violent, the person is not inside a private residence, they're in a public space, then PSR will likely be dispatched. They should be. Interestingly enough, a little over a week ago in my own neighborhood, there was a homeless gentleman who was partially naked, who was simply laying in a pile of mulch next to the dairy park. He wasn't doing anything. He was laying in one of those like paint me like one of your French girl poses. And he did not appear to be armed from what our family saw, but yet like 6 cop cars rolled up to deal with the situation. 6 cop cars full of people, full of officers. And I kept wondering, like, where is Portland Street Response? Why was this the response to this gentleman laying there, with his behind out in the air, not bothering anybody, but obviously like not fully clothed? And my daughter was like, is his butt just too powerful for one cop car full of cops that y'all had to send 6? I actually was wondering at the time, are they trying to justify their police budget by saying we need this strong of a response? We are having to use up this much in resources and human power. I don't know. For me, I was like, why aren't you calling out the PSR? Why is that not who is responding? This seems like a situation. Again, I don't know everything about what went down, but nothing looked violent to us. Nothing looked dangerous. It seemed like the perfect situation for PSR to respond. I don't trust cops to de-escalate situations in Portland. They have a history of not, and I don't trust them to safely and with dignity deal with the homeless folks who live in our neighborhoods, with our homeless neighbors. Was that a situation where community intervention was warranted? Maybe. I don't know, like I personally don't care if somebody is high as balls on a pile of mulch with their butt out, but it was next to a playground, so like I get it. I don't know why that was a situation in which several cop cars had to roll up. Meanwhile, the rare occasion when I have had to call them when I'm pretty sure a violent crime was being committed, crickets. Actually, eventually 2 of them did show up like 40 minutes later and then say they couldn't help. If she's not answering her door, there's nothing we can do. I think the Portland Police Bureau is such a good example of the cops don't protect the citizenry. They don't provide for public safety. They protect property. We have cops protecting the Tesla dealership on Macadam Avenue, not like a woman experiencing domestic violence in East Portland. All of this talk of public safety from the pro-cop segment of Portland, including the folks on city council who are very pro-cop, Dan Ryan. I just want to once again question, for the hundreds of millions of dollars of our taxpayer money that we are giving the Portland police, what are they doing to procure the public safety? My comments are overwhelmingly full of people who are like, I don't feel safer from the Portland police. They've never helped me in a crisis. They don't show up, or I feel like they're actually antagonistic to public safety. They escalate instead of de-escalate. I don't know. I mean, they stood aside and let the Proud Boys roll through my neighborhood. I just really encourage folks to think about the ways that we actually procure, provide, protect public safety that have nothing to do with armed police officers. What is the framework? What are the policies? What is the kind of infrastructure and what kind of support do we actually provide to cities like Portland, any city in the country, and its residents that actually functionally does help us be safer? It's like when we get to looking at the root of the homeless crisis in Portland, which I've made a number of videos on that subject, paying millions and millions and millions of dollars to private companies to sweep camps, criminalizing homelessness as SCOTUS did in their Grants Pass ruling, pulling back decriminalization in Oregon. None of that actually provides for the public safety. We're looking at all of these symptoms and we have no interest in treating the root cause of why people are struggling with substance use, why people are struggling with homelessness. And if you want to provide for the public safety, you can't keep like slapping all these ineffectual band-aids on a gaping wound. If you're upset at needles in the parks, the solution is not to hire more cops. I guess I would just be interested in knowing what people think the kind of policies and programs are that actually do provide for public safety. What could we do with that? What is it, like $285 million or whatever? If we didn't spend it all on cops, what could we do with that fund? So how could we transform our city? What would it look like to attempt to address the root causes of these issues and fix long-standing systemic problems? What would it look like to fund those programs? How would it be transformative, not just for our city, but for America overall? Rather than just doing damage control and like hiring more cops is not damage control. One of my kids actually just recently had to do a paper for one of her poli-sci classes, and she was talking about how there's a fair amount of research on the tough on crime policies and how they don't actually work. They don't actually make cities safer. They don't lower the homicide rate, they don't lower the violent crime rate. A lot of cities, they don't actually result in more convictions either. Anyway, just something to think about. I'm never going to think that the cops are a solution to anything. And I'm actually really, really interested in what are the solutions? What are the ways that we can create a safer Portland, a more prosperous Portland? But also for the entire country, what are the actual solutions? What are the programs we could invest in? Obviously, I have ideas about what I think those are. I'm not a policy expert. I just think there's so much potential for us to structure things differently. And I think PSR is a good example of trying to think of a different way to address an issue and reach people in crisis. That is not going to result in them being brutalized by the cops. It's not going to result in suicide by cop. It's not going to end up with people being charged with crimes because the cops came in and escalated instead of de-escalating. I want those things that have a good resolution for the people. When we look at public safety, I fail to see how the cops provide for that. I just see that we have so many other pathways through which we could, if we all agree that what we want is public safety, we all agree that is a good and worthy goal to have for any major metropolitan area, right? We should feel safe in the communities in which we live. Then how do we get that? What are the actual ways that we pursue that? Anyway, just something I'm thinking about. Appreciate all the folks who weighed in on this conversation, by the way.